Okay, let us begin. Good evening, everyone. Erev Tov. My name is Terry Swartz-Russell. I am the Director of Family and Adult Education at Temple Emmanuel. We're thrilled to be with you tonight, but not thrilled that we have to have this conversation and we have to explore yet again the issue of anti-Semitism. A few housekeeping words of wisdom here. We will be muting everyone while Noam is speaking. He will speak for a while. If and as you have questions, please put them in the chat. We have a lot of people coming to listen to this talk, and I will then moderate some Q&A after Noam is done. It's best if you put your questions in the chat, and if I don't get to them, just send it again. Okay. If you do not, we are recording. If you do not want to be on screen, you can stop your video and you can mute, and that will keep you from being seen. We will send out the recording to all those who registered for this evening's talk, probably next week sometime, so you can share it with others. We want to welcome everybody who's come from near and far. Where Temple Emmanuel is thrilled to be able to partner tonight with Solomon Schechter Davis, the IAC, the Israeli American Council, all places where Noam has an affiliation of some kind as he was growing up or wherever. So I want to pause and just let everybody quell for a minute for whatever connection you have, or more than one. I have quite a few in my family to those institutions. And it's wonderful. It's wonderful that we can all come together. This Noam and his topic on anti-Semitism on the college campus was brought to us by Temple Emmanuel member Alice Bresman, who I'm thrilled to have as a partner in planning this. Alice has a long reach, so even if you're not affiliated with one of those organizations, you might be here because of Alice, friends of Alice.
I don't know how to do that.
So I'm going to ask everybody once again to mute yourself, and I'm going to turn it over to Alice to introduce our speaker tonight, and take it away, Alice.
I too want to welcome all of you. There are so many of you interested in this topic, and we have people here tonight from California to upstate New York. And as Terry said, I too wish that so many of us didn't need to get together to hear about this. In 2004, the David Project did a film, Columbia Unbecoming. And about 15 years ago, Temple Emmanuel did its first program on anti-Semitism on college campuses. And here we are today. And sad to say that things have gotten worse. Things are more virulent and prevalent on our college campuses. Tonight, we welcome Noam Bornstein, a Jewish campus activist, to share with us what Jewish students are facing on campus today. Noam Bornstein is president of the University of Massachusetts Amherst Student Alliance for Israel, as well as a member of the activism group Jewish on Campus and the Israeli American Council activism team. During his time at UMass, Noam has organized protests against BDS events on campus, as well as created meaningful partnerships with other student groups. Noam is a rising senior studying psychology and Judaic studies. He is a unit head at Camp Yavna, and as Terry said, he's also a proud graduate of Gann Academy and Solomon Schechter Day School. And for Temple Emmanuel members, he's also a graduate of RUSY. I now give you Noam Borenstein.
Hello, hello. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, everybody that was involved in putting this together. I am so excited to be talking to all of you about everything that is happening on college campuses and at UMass. So without further ado, I will get right into it. I will share my screen here. All right, perfect. So anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism on college campuses and social media. So I'm going to be talking today about my personal experiences, how my opinions on where this comes from and what we can do going forward in the future. So first, a little bit about myself. I was born in Israel, in Jerusalem. I lived there not for very long, till I was about two and a half. Then I moved to Boston, where I went to Solomon Schechter and then Guyton Academy. So I was in the Jewish day schools all the way through 12th grade. I began a lot of my activism work actually in high school with IAC. I was part of their media room program, which was a lot of social media activism. And I was also involved in USY, which was an amazing experience. After high school, I went on to UMass, where I'm now studying to get my undergraduate in psychology and Judaic studies. I'm now working as the president for Student Alliance for Israel. And I am also working for the IEC. I contribute to an Instagram account called Jewish on Campus. I'm going to be a unit head at Camp Yavna, Rosh Eda. And this past year, I also interned with Stand With Us. So I've been doing the activism shtick for quite a while now. It is always very exciting. But I wanted to start the conversation about my personal college experience, not when I showed up to college, but actually my perceptions of college going into university, what I expected to happen. And what I was always sort of told growing up was that college is a place for open conversations. I spent the vast majority of my childhood learning and understanding my own Jewish identity. And I was under the impression that college was a place to take your own identity and express it to other people, to learn from other people about their own identities, and to be able to have this exchange of conversation and understanding that would sort of take place. And I was really excited for that opportunity to get to college and to be able to learn from other people and have other people learn from me. The reality when I actually got to campus was definitely a shock and definitely different. Right off the bat, I did not feel like my identity was accepted. And this sort of happened on both an implicit sort of day-to-day level with even my friend groups on campus, and also very explicitly. So firstly, the implicit anti-Semitism that I was experiencing was this idea that you can be Jewish, but it's kind of socially uncomfortable to be outwardly Jewish, right? So for example, I would hang out with my non-Jewish friends during the week, and then when I would take the time out on Friday to go to the Hillel, it would be sort of like an uncomfortable experience, right? I would get a lot of like, why are you coming? Why are you like doing this Jewish stuff, right? People didn't really understand or want to understand why I was taking the time out of my week and out of my day to be part of Jewish life. And I think a lot of my Jewish friends also sort of caved into it a little bit. They started not going as much because it became socially uncomfortable. So there was a lot of that kind of stuff. And also there was a lot of discomfort expressing my Israeli identity. And this is something that happened more times than I can count, where I would introduce myself to somebody new. They would ask, what's your name? I would say, my name is Noam. They would say, you're not from America. That's not a typical American name. Where are you from? And I would say, I'm from Israel. And so many times the response I got was, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for asking, right? Like, I'm sorry for asking where you're from. That's an uncomfortable conversation. I don't want to touch it. Right. And that made me feel very uncomfortable because the place that I'm from is just the place that I'm from, and it shouldn't be an uncomfortable conversation. Right. But people didn't want to touch these subjects of Jewish identity and Israel more specifically. So people chose to avoid it altogether. And it created this paradigm on campus where I felt that if I put my head down and I didn't sort of, engage too actively in my Jewish identity, then I could avoid all of this discomfort that I was feeling. Now that stuff on the, sort of implicit, the day-to-day kind of stuff. There was also very explicit anti-Semitism that I experienced on campus. This here is an example of swastikas that were found at the Fine Arts Center. I believe this is my freshman year. There was swastikas found in one of the dorm rooms, vandalized in one of the dorm rooms, along with the N-word. at some point, and that kept popping up throughout the semester. My sophomore year, my mezuzah was torn off my door in my dorm room. We still have no idea who did it or anything like that. In my freshman year English writing class, I was with another Israeli kid. We would come and we would speak Hebrew as we were coming in. We would sort of talk a bit in Hebrew as we were leaving. And one of the other kids who we found actually pretty nice at the time in my class came up to us and he said, oh, you guys are speaking Hebrew. Can you teach me any words? And, of course we, taught him, hello, goodbye, peace, the whole bit. Just a couple words here and there. And he said, well, this is great for me. I'm in the business school. So this will be really helpful. So like really things like that would also happen a lot that, a lot of it never would get reported. But there was a lot of anti-Semitism that I was experiencing. So my activism on campus, so for the first semester, I sort of was stuck in this mentality of wanting to put my head down. It was like too much to engage. It was like very socially uncomfortable to be outward about it. And my first semester of freshman year, there was a BDS panel on campus. Some named people that showed up were like Linda Sarsour and Roger Waters. And in this sort of panel that they had, they put the faces of Jewish students on a projector, of Jewish students on campus to say, here are like the Zionists in your school. These are, the problematic people in front of a whole auditorium. So when they came back a second time for my second semester freshman year, we felt like there was something we had to do about it. And specifically, I was really upset that my expectations of college had been so fundamentally different than what I was actually experiencing, in the sense that I wanted to be able to have real conversations with people that I disagreed with, right? Where we could actually understand each other's humanity and identity. And this is sort of the backdrop for this End Polarization, Promote Peace. We wanted to have an event where we promoted the idea of dialogue and understanding and conversation. So that was actually a pretty successful event. We were able to get a lot of people out there, and we were able to add our narrative to the conversation when that second BDS panel came. So that was really nice and a successful event. So all of these things, both the explicit anti-Semitism that we were facing and the implicit anti-Semitism that we were facing, sort of culminated with this vandalism. So on the left is the one that's sort of the catalyst for this whole conversation, which is the vandalism of the Hillel House on Yom HaShoah with the word Palestine. The one on the right is actually from this year. It was before the whole escalation thing happened, but it was also from this year. But the Hillel one was really, I think, what kickstarted the Jewish community as a whole to try to do something. Why? Because this, for a lot of us, was a sign that we were going to be collectively blamed for anything that was happening in the conflict or any sort of situation, right? This was telling the Jewish community as a whole that your connection to Israel is fundamentally problematic, right? And that we can blame you for not only your connection to Israel as sort of an identity, but also just as Jews, right? That being Jewish fundamentally connects you there, and we can blame you for it. So this sort of galvanized, I think, the Jewish community into trying to do something about it. But what was the school's response? So the school's response I found pretty interesting, because the chancellor did actually issue a statement strongly condemning the anti-Semitism. This was, I think, very positive, obviously. He was very, very outward about his the fact that it was anti-Semitic. He called it a very active act of anti-Semitism, and the fact that it was on Yom HaShoah was even worse, and was very strong in his language. But there was no practical action taken, and we didn't actually feel more safe in our day-to-day lives going about campus because of these words, as much as it's appreciated. The student government at the time, the president was Jewish. So she came out with a statement sort of representing the student government, saying that this was anti-Semitism, that this was a problem, and all of that good stuff. But there were a lot of people in student government who either downplayed the incident, actively supported the vandalism, and generally just did not acknowledge the fact that this was hugely problematic. So what was happening is that people at the administration at the top were sort of coming out with these statements, but the general culture on campus was A, getting worse, and B, nobody was doing anything about it. So our reaction was to basically start a discussion about introducing the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, IHRA. We'll be talking more about that in a little bit, but essentially it's a definition of anti-Semitism that people can adopt, right? So that they have a better understanding of what anti-Semitism looks like. But the effort was essentially immediately shut down. So how did this happen? First of all, we did something really, really cool, in my opinion, which is that we got every single Jewish organization, club, or if any level of affiliation on campus, anything that students were involved with, to support the passing of IHRA. And that was really cool in and of itself, because we got people who generally have very different political views, religious views, all of this kind of stuff. And we were able to sort of unite over this one idea. But instead of immediately going for IHRA, our plan was to have a training on anti-Semitism with student government to sort of get them to understand what anti-Semitism looks like. We did not want to talk about Israel. We wanted to talk about how anti-Semitism functions historically and broadly, so that people can begin to understand how that incorporates into our campus. So we decided to have sort of a forum meeting with student government to talk about what we wanted to talk about in this training, so that we could, move forward in making Jewish students feel more safe. But when we got to this event, basically there are a lot of members of Students for Justice in Palestine in student government. So they heard about it and they essentially hijacked the meeting. They disrupted the meeting to insist that we were not allowed to deal with anti-Semitism until we agreed that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. That is basically an exact phrase that was told to me during this meeting. And the problem is that Jewish students are feeling levels of, unsafety on many, many different levels, not just on the Israel conversation. And the fact that a litmus test is being created, that we have to fundamentally compromise this aspect of our identity and our connection to Israel in order to feel more safe, is hugely problematic. There should not be a litmus test on anti-Semitism. So what we did in this meeting is we called it out. We said, look, we didn't come here to talk about Israel. We want to find a way for Jewish students to feel more safe on our campus. And what was the reaction that we got from these students when we rightfully called them out on being anti-Semitic? They said, I'm not anti-Semitic, I have Jewish friends. Literally word for word. I'm not anti-Semitic, I don't hate Jews. And this for me was a really important moment where I'm beginning to realize that people don't understand that anti-Semitism is more broad than just hatred of Jews, right? It's not just single-handedly, we hate Jews, and if the only way to be anti-Semitic is to say that phrase. It was interesting to me how rhetoric that we generally consider to be problematic, saying, I just don't hate X group of people, I have friends from this X group, that people could fall back on that rhetoric very, very quickly. So the question then becomes, why don't people listen when we say that this is anti-Semitic in these spaces? And I think the idea here is that the reason that people don't listen to Jews when we say that something is anti-Semitic and will choose instead to fall back on this kind of rhetoric is because they see Jews as fundamentally powerful, as taking the position of power, which is historically how anti-Semitism is perpetuated. By putting Jews at the top, you're able to punch up. You're not actually insulting Jews. You're punching up, you're fighting the power. And I think that framework, which is absolutely an implicit bias that people have about Jews, that framework is what allows people to say, well, I'm not being anti-Semitic, I'm just fighting the power. I'm just pushing back against all of these things. And positioning Jews as that power is I think, very typical thing that we've seen historically that is playing out on college campuses. And ultimately, the core of it is that people are not doing the work to understand anti-Semitism. They don't take the time to understand anti-Semitic tropes. They don't take the time to understand how their actions or their words might harm or affect Jews, even inadvertently, even if they don't mean it. They're not putting in that effort. So what does it mean to do the work when it comes to understanding Jewishness? What does it mean to put in that effort? And I think there are two main ideas here. One is understanding Jewish identity, and two is understanding the cyclical nature of anti-Semitism or understanding anti-Semitism broadly. So first, the most important thing to understand about Jewish identity is the idea that Jews are an ethno-religious group, right? We fully have a religion, but we are also an ethnic identity that is connected to a specific place, that is indigenous to a specific place, and that our culture and practices all come from a specific place, and that our identity, and that place, by the way, is Israel, our identity in Israel is valid, and we have the right to self-determination in that indigenous land. And I think that that is a deep, deep gap in people's understanding of Jewish identity, especially on college campuses. A lot of what I heard in this conversation with student government and SJP was, well, I don't hate Jews because I believe that Jews have the right to practice whatever religion they want. And it's like, that's great. That is a good start, but it is not the end all be all of Jewish identity. If you cut Jewish identity in half, then you're not actually doing the work to understand who we are fully. So we have to take Jewish identity and understand Jewish identity in its complexity. And the second is to understand the cyclical nature of anti-Semitism. So like we discussed, this is understanding that in every single generation, anti-Semitism will change to fit the needs of the society that it's in. So, for example, in the Middle Ages, when Christianity was seen as the highest form of truth, Jews were positioned to be Satanists, to be the opposite of salvation, the roadblock to salvation. In the Middle Ages, once society progressed to a point of understanding science as the fundamental truth, Jews were positioned as genetically inferior, as the opposite of what it meant to be part of this world, the scientific understanding of the world. We had inferior genes. In the Soviet Union, we were made out to be capitalists. On the far right wing, we're made out to be communists. It's whatever society needs in order to scapegoat Jews. And that is a fundamental aspect of anti-Semitism that I think also is not understood on a broad scale. Instead, people think that anti-Semitism is simply Nazism and that there is no molding or no shift that it can take. And the second important aspect to understand about anti-Semitism is this idea of Purim anti-Semitism versus Hanukkah anti-Semitism. So what is this concept of Purim versus Hanukkah anti-Semitism? Purim anti-Semitism is, like it's named, based on the holiday of Purim. And it's the idea of coming after Jewish bodies. It's the idea of anti-Semitism based on the extermination of Jewish bodies. We want to kill Jews. It is very explicit. It is very outright. Hanukkah anti-Semitism, on the other hand, is based on the idea that it's not about hating Jews, but it's about what makes you Jewish. It's not about coming after Jewish bodies. It's coming after Jewish soul and identity. And this kind of anti-Semitism is often predicated on forcing Jews to change how they view their own identity in order to be accepted. And this is a lot of the anti-Semitism that I have experienced on college campuses. We can't talk about anti-Semitism. We cannot guarantee your safety until you shift your identity so that it doesn't include Israel. And that is a lot of what people need to understand, is that that also has played out historically. That's not just something that has existed now. That is a systemic aspect of anti-Semitism that is pervasive throughout history. So what is a tool then practically that we can use to understand anti-Semitism in this sort of not really new definition, but a more broad definition? And the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism is basically based on this principle. It's based on the idea that instead of defining anti-Semitism as simply hatred of Jews, it's about understanding anti-Semitism as a more broad perception of Jews. Right, I'll read out the beginning of the definition here. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. And I think this understanding of anti-Semitism is really important because it broadens our understanding of anti-Semitism so that it can incorporate these different aspects of how it's existed historically instead of minimizing it to one simple definition of anti-Semitism. And important with this is also the examples that are given in the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. I won't go through all of them right now, but the gist is that we have very common understanding of anti-Semitism, things like calling for aiding or justifying the killing of Jews in the name of a radical ideology, denying the Holocaust, accusing Jews of being more loyal to Israel, right? Like dual loyalty tropes, things that we understand. And also the ideas of a lot of new understandings of anti-Semitism, like applying double standards of it to Israel, not required of other countries, denying the Jewish people the right to self-determination, right? These kind of things are also new understandings of anti-Semitism that are incorporated and exist to create a more broad understanding of anti-Semitism. So a year after the vandalism, we at UMass, a lot of the Jewish community felt even less safe. And after this whole thing with SJP happened, we felt that there was really no tangible action that was going to be taken, which was really depressing. But my very close friend, Ben Dabruzin, and I decided to write a letter to the Daily Collegian, basically talking about this idea. And we wanted to talk about the lack of accountability and also just bring, attention, hopefully, to the larger UMass community that nothing was being done about this rise in anti-Semitism. And I wanted to read this quote because I think not only does it summarize what this letter was about, but it summarizes, I think, a big important point that colleges need to understand generally. People are beginning to look inward and examine what their internalized biases are and what they can do to begin to fix systemic oppression. What we ask is that the same work be done for the Jewish community. In order to be an ally to the Jewish community, people have to learn what anti-Semitism is, not just at the explicit level, but at the implicit internalized level. And this is, I think, the message that we have for universities, is that when universities only define anti-Semitism in this one narrow way, it allows these other aspects of anti-Semitism to go unlearned by the general community, advance, progress, and become the dominant ideology again. And I think what we need for universities to do is do that same work that is being done for everybody else, to begin to look at their internalized biases and understand anti-Semitism on the systemic, implicit, and internalized level. Real quick, this is, in my opinion, just some good news because we've been talking a lot about anti-Semitism. This is, according to the AGC, universities that have adopted IHRA. So there is a relatively decent list. It is growing. I hope that as time goes on, more universities can take on this definition and also actually internalize it, because just because you pass the definition in one instance doesn't mean that you actually fully understand anti-Semitism. So I think it's important. This is a good first step for these universities, but ultimately the goal is to have Jewish students feel more safe on college campuses. So I wanted to discuss also what happens when universities ignore this anti-Semitism, because we've sort of talked about it just at UMass, but I also wanted to talk about other universities and things that have been happening across the country. So this is, for example, at Hillel, at Harvard, not too far from where I live in Boston. The Hillel doors was smashed and a Palestinian flag was tied to the door. Again, this is sort of an issue of vandalism and collectively blaming Jews for everything that is happening in the land over there. And vandalisms, this is the tip of the iceberg, is the vandalisms. I could go on and on about how many vandalisms there have been. It is honestly nonstop, not just at college campuses, but also at synagogues, right? Everybody, for the most part, I assume, knows about this massive rise in anti-Semitism that's been happening, and vandalisms, there's no shortage of vandalisms. I also wanted to talk about this incident at Tufts University about a student named Max Price. Basically, the Tufts student government was bringing an anti-Semitic referendum to the student body. And this student, Max Price, who was on the union judiciary, tried to speak up during this meeting. And during this meeting, when he tried to speak up against this anti-Semitism, he was muted. He was not allowed to speak. And after that meeting, the student government tried to impeach him. And in this particular instance, it was unsuccessful. But I wanted to draw attention to the fact that Jewish students in these universities are being pushed out of their positions because of their connection to Israel and because they believe in the Jewish right to self-determination. And I think when we consider sort of general trend of anti-Semitism, I think the fact that Jews are being pushed out of positions in this way is a big red flag. This is really, really problematic. And I think that's something that we really need to pay attention to. So in that case, it went all right in the sense that he was able to stay in that position. This is another example of the now ex-president of the student body at the University of Southern California. There was no trial or impeachment or anything like that. This person basically just got horrible, horrible comments about the fact that she believed in the Jewish right to self-determination. And she ended up having to resign just because of the immense amount of harassment that she was facing. Again, Jews being pushed out of these positions is horribly, horribly problematic. This is an incident that happened recently at Rutgers University. Rutgers has a huge Jewish population. I think it's one of the biggest Jewish populations in the country, if I'm not mistaken. And during this whole rise of anti-Semitism, they came out with a statement saying that we support the Jewish community and that, you know, we stand against anti-Semitism. And they got a ton of backlash for not including the Palestinian narrative in this statement, which, by the way, I'm very explicitly not talking about anything that's happening there because I think the focus of this conversation is on universities. But the point is that there doesn't have to be a litmus test on condemning anti-Semitism in America. And the fact that the university, instead of even coming out with a new statement that included its support for Palestinian community members, that would be one thing. But coming out and apologizing for condemning anti-Semitism, I think is a crazy thing that I would never ever expect out of a university. This is an incident that I also wanted to draw attention to about Jewish professors. This is a Minnesota law student resigning from the Jewish Studies Center because they were not dealing with the anti-Semitism at their school and more broadly not addressing it. And I just wanted to point this out because I felt that something very similar from my own Judaic Studies department. I haven't really felt that they've been active, or I haven't seen anything saying that they've been active. So I think it's important to note on the fact that there are a lot of these Judaic studies programs and departments that I don't feel are really doing enough to combat or speak out against this anti-Semitism. So those are obviously all things that are happening in person. I wanted to transition also to talking about social media. Specifically, I wanted to highlight this one story about this activist, Eve Barlow. Eve Barlow spent the vast majority of her career as a music reporter and got very well connected in the music world, music industry. And essentially, in the past year or so, she has lost almost all of her opportunities in the music industry in reporting because of her support for Israel, for Jewish self-determination. And I wanted to touch on this because I think it's important to understand that while all of these things are happening online, it very much spills into the rest of the world. And the things that I think this is, pretty straightforward in our modern day, but saying things online, all this kind of stuff really spills over. And I think the amount of aggressive hate that we're seeing online absolutely influenced the large amount of physical attacks that were happening across the country and across the world. And this is so all of these incidents to me culminate to this tweet. I think this really exemplifies what is happening. This tweet says, I just read a note from one such shocked parent. Her daughter's assigned college roommates emailed her to say that they can't live with an Israel-supporting Jew after she shared with them her worry about her Israeli family who were under rocket fire from Hamas. And especially in the past couple of weeks, it was already uncomfortable to be an outward Jewish student on campus. I am genuinely dreading going back to school and trying to be actively Jewish and Israeli because we're in a reality where you can't worry about your family, regardless of any larger political debate that is happening. In a reality where you can't be worried about your family because of this, and that your roommates will kick you out because of this, is a reality that is genuinely, it's gotten even worse in the past couple of weeks. And at the core, Jews are feeling isolated. We feel like our connections are being cut off because of our identities. And this is only progressing. This is only getting worse as time goes on. And I wanted to highlight one more quote because I think it also sort of reiterates for the larger historical context of what's happening. I'm beginning to suspect that it's not attacks on Jews in the West, attacks on Jews in the West are the unfortunate and unintended consequences of the persistent demonization of Israel, but rather the demonization of the Jewish state is undertaken so as to re-legitimize attacks on Jews in the West. And I think this is the idea that even before any of this happened, people had these perceptions of Jews, that we are powerful, have control, and all of these things that have existed throughout history. And all this is the culmination of those mentalities that have existed on college campuses and in the country and in the world for all of this time. So now I want to talk about what can we do? What is happening? What is the Jewish community doing? What are Jewish students doing? So the first thing, and which I think is really important, is that the Jewish community, especially on college campuses, has not been quiet and taken all of this lying down. There has been a very large Jewish movement pushing back against this anti-Semitism. And that is sort of the environment that in which Jewish on Campus was created. So Jewish on Campus is an Instagram account that I contribute to. There's a lot of people who work with it. They are all absolutely fantastic. And basically what we do is the main thing that we do is we take submissions of people's stories and we just post it on our page for people to see. And the reason why we do this is because there are many, many, many incidents that don't get reported, that people don't feel comfortable sharing to administrators, both because they might have to put their name on it, or even if it's anonymous, it's just a very stressful situation. So we have a page and a platform for Jews to be able to share their experiences with anti-Semitism, and we amplify it. So that's one aspect of what we do. And then the other aspect is creating infographics. Obviously, infographics can only go so far in terms of educating on just general political, moral issues. But we feel that, putting these things out here is a really good place, a really good start. So we, take different issues that we see as they come up, or just even proactively talking about Jewish identity. This, for example, there's been a couple of incidents of Jewish students being attacked in their campuses for speaking Hebrew. That's been something that's happened a couple of times now across the country. So we made a post. Usually most of our posts are geared toward things that are happening on college campuses, but we'll also talk about Jewish identity more broadly. This is a program that I do with IAC called You Are Not Alone. Basically what this is an opportunity for high school students to just talk about the things that they experience. I felt that it was important to highlight this because I think a lot of our activism also needs to be focused on the mental health of our community. And I think especially for students, both college students and younger, feel a great amount of stress and pressure being in these environments. And I think programs like this, they're really basically just venting sessions. And then they're venting sessions. We also give tools for understanding how to deal with all of this stuff. But it's, for me, I think a really good opportunity for students to come and talk about the things that are worrying them and the things that they have to deal with. So those are things that we do within our community. And there are also things that we can do outside of our community. This is a Hillel program that I believe exists across the whole country called Bridging the Divide. Basically, this sets out to do what I have always wanted to do on college campuses, which is create relationships with students with different identities on campus to begin to understand each other and to actually hear each other's narratives and our perspectives. And basically, the Bridging the Divide internship is we get leaders from different clubs on campus, from different cultural clubs on campus. And we, first of all, just have meetings and discussions with them. We also do an Israel trip, which is an absolutely fantastic trip. We go through every possible perspective that exists and sort of just learn from each other and understand. And then we also do events together. And we've been able to create really strong connections with other student groups because of this. So for example, we had one event with the UMass Black Student Union, BSU, where we had an Ethiopian Israeli woman come to speak. She spoke about her identity, first of all, as an Ethiopian Jew, as an Ethiopian Israeli, and then how that differed when she came to America. It was an absolutely fascinating conversation. And basically the UMass SJP group tried to get BSU to cancel the event because she was Israeli, but because of these relationships that we had built, the event went on, and that was a really positive experience, I think, for both of our communities. And this is another example. We've gotten really close with the Hindu group on campus, and I think in general, the Hindu-Jewish relationship is something that has been building and progressing and getting stronger over time, which I'm really happy about. This is an Instagram page called Hindu on Campus, which is actually inspired by Jewish on Campus to amplify the voices and experience of Hindu students on college campuses. It's a little newer, and we've been able to foster a really strong relationship with them. So we're talking about, what are things that we can do practically to be to combat anti-Semitism. And we have all these different programs and, being allies and all this stuff. And I think ultimately the best thing that we can do to combat anti-Semitism is also just to take pride in our identity. Fundamentally, the way we combat anti-Semitism is to take pride in our identity. So to conclude, I think people need to do the work for yourself and encourage others to do it as well. We need to create meaningful relationships that enrich each other, and above all else, be a proud Jew. I wanted to thank Temple Emmanuel, Yavne, Schechter, again, IAC, all of these institutions that have been so fundamental and crucial to my growth, both as a Jew, as a human. I could not be more appreciative of everything all of you have given to me. I want to say a special thank you to Alice. You have done such a crazy amount of work in this event, putting this all together, and I really, really appreciate it. If anybody has any questions, first of all, you can contact me at nyborens@gmail.com. But now I also wanted to open the questions to everybody else.
Okay, so thank you, Noam. That was quite a presentation. You've put your heart and soul into it. Thank you. There are some questions. I'll read you a couple and you can go with that, and then I'll share some more. One is from Jessica. She's a high school rising junior and is going into college in a few years. What is she getting herself into, and how should she handle herself? Well, Alice says, how can we as individuals and as a Jewish community, what can we do to help our Jewish students on campus?
Yeah, so those are two amazing questions off the bat. I guess they're pretty well connected, so I'll sort of touch on both of them. I think the first thing to understand going into college is that there will be difficulties, and that there are going to be people who will say and do problematic things. I think the best thing that we can do, and this sort of speaks to the end of what I was saying, the best thing that we can do is to take pride and to be outward and not put our head down because it's going to be nerve-wracking. And we should absolutely, no matter what, be outward with our identity. And I think that is the first thing that we can do. And also doing your best, first of all, being connected to the Jewish community at your campus, because that is an incredible support system. That is actually probably the first thing that I will say. Even before everything else, having that support system of the Jewish community, students that are experiencing the same thing as you, is really incredible. So along those lines, taking the time to be involved in that Jewish community. I don't know if you grew up in the Jewish schools and all that kind of stuff, but I think something that we run into, a problem that we run into, is because we're sort of naturally connected to the Jewish community. Once we get to college, we don't realize that you have to put very active effort into maintaining that connection, and you have to take the time out to go and to come to these events and to be a part of it. So that's what I would say is, take the time to go to these events, be a part of the community, create that support system. And as for what the rest of the Jewish community can do, I mean, first of all, just hearing this, for me, and I think for so many Jewish students, just the fact that we feel that the Jewish community is listening to us is absolutely fantastic. And I would say just, creating those opportunities for students to engage in their identities and also to express how they're feeling, making sure that everybody has the opportunity to express themselves. And also, I think preparing for the realities of college. I do think, that I went in a little naive. that I wasn't, even though I think now more recently, especially in my senior year, people were definitely preparing me. I think that sort of preparation can start even earlier, and we can be ready for those realities coming to campus.
Okay. Michael, who's in Toronto, says the situation here in Toronto and across Canada is similar. B'nai B'rith Canada recently had an online town hall with students and staff from all 3 University of Toronto campuses. They all felt growing anti-Semitism to the point where they no longer wear a kippah on campus. The Graduate Students Union allows halal food, but somehow equated the request for kosher food to support for Israel and would not allow it. B'nai B'rith has contacted the university president, who has not taken concrete action. Instead, he has set up another committee to study the problem. So clearly this is happening in lots of other places, not just in the United States. Stephen asked, are there any physical threats to Jews at UMass?
So there was one incident that actually went unreported. There haven't been, I think online, a couple of my friends have gotten some sort of physical threats, but not from people that they know. They just know that they go to UMass. So that's been a thing. There was somebody threw glass bottles at the Hillel house a couple months ago. And it was, it was a fraternity nearby. And they said something to the effect of, it was first like free Palestine and then like fuck Palestine. And I think the point was that they were very much just trying to get a rise out of the Jews that were living in Hillel, and felt like it was funny to play on all of these very divisive tropes. And yeah, so they threw bottles at the Hillel. Other than that, thank God, nobody has been attacked or anything like that. I did want to touch on real quick. I apologize. I forget the name of the person who commented this, but about Toronto. I do think that we have something to learn from what other countries have also been experiencing. Specifically, France and the UK have sort of been a couple of years ahead, so to speak, on this rise in anti-Semitism, and it's been happening for a very long time. And I think, what they've been experiencing is even, a mass wave of Aliyah. And I think that sort of level of unsafety where people really even begin to feel like they can't stay is something that's happening there. And I think we need to understand that is also something that is happening in other countries, that it's like even worse.
Yes, unfortunately. Another question from Lisa says, how can the UMass efforts be extended to other campuses?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Something that I'm personally trying to figure out now is what kind of sort of large campaign we can do across college campuses and what sort of connections we can make. But the idea is I do think that initiatives like IHRA are something that can start in one place and then expand and gain traction throughout the country. So I think those kind of resolutions that, I think what IHRA is, it's not just the resolution itself, it's also what it stands for. It stands for this broader understanding of anti-Semitism. So when you pass it, it has that sort of weight to it. And I think that's something that starts in one place, and the more traction it gains, the more it will disperse.
Okay, from Benjamin, we have, what should the Jewish high school students be doing to prepare our students? I have been thoroughly frustrated by the lack of formal programs over the 4 years of high school in this regard.
Yeah, so I think, again, the first thing is I think having these more outward, conversations about the reality and what's happening. I do think a very important aspect is deeply understanding our own identities as well. Because when we have those sort of tools, we can bring that to our campuses. And I think specifically understanding Jewish identity as an ethno-religion, that's sort of like a new word that's been going around, because in Hebrew, we would just say like right? But ethno-religion is sort of the newer word going around that incorporates this idea of it having a religious identity and also an ethnic identity. And I think emphasizing that Jewish identity is very much both of these things throughout our education will help prepare students from an identity perspective to go into it with that level of strength, with that level of deep understanding of who they are, so they don't feel like they have to put their head down because they don't know.
So I'll just say that one of the reasons that we wanted to partner with Schechter and Gann and Yavna was that we were really hoping we'd get more younger people, but we got a lot of parents. So my message to parents, of course, is to take the recording and watch it with your child and their friends. So that's just my words of wisdom. From Scott, he wants to know, how does Noam deal with fellow Jews who wanted open Hillel and Jews from JVP, and if not now, who say anti-Zionism can never be anti-Semitism?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, there's this conversation of tokenization, which exists not just in our community, but in every marginalized community that exists in the world. And that's really important to understand, that they represent a vast minority. I think it's also, this is sort of, I think there could be a whole presentation in and of itself about why Jews start to see themselves as only a religious identity, to the point where any engagement with an ethnic identity is hugely problematic. The answer being because of anti-Semitism in Europe, and that's sort of the framework in which we were given emancipation, was the idea that if we became a solely religious identity, we could gain civil rights in Europe. And I think that mentality has sort of, made its way into a lot of Jews who don't grow up understanding our own perspectives and identities. So the way that I personally deal with it is, first of all, by knowing that it's a minority, and also by understanding this historical context. And I feel that it's able to be combated when we give all Jews, and especially I think a lot of these Jews are ones that didn't grow up in the Jewish community, which is why they grow up with sort of a more non-Jewish understanding of Jewish identity. So trying to give as many Jews as possible a deep understanding of Jewish identity.
Okay, Jennifer says her initial question is, can we clone you, Noam? But then she goes on and asks another question. As a corollary to Benjamin's question, is there any push to put out easily digestible material for those students who go to public schools? For those Jewish students who go to public or are not very observant and don't have a good understanding of anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism, to get them prepped for life on campus so that they feel they're armed with information?
Yeah, so that's a lot of the work that I think Jewish on Campus has been able to do, is to create these sort of sound bites. I'm actually going to take this time to rattle off a couple of people to follow because I think they are absolutely fantastic. I'm going to highlight, first of all, I mentioned Eve Barlow, who is just an absolutely fantastic activist and is fantastic at coming up with these like one-word sound bites. Second of all, Rudy Rothman. He talks a little bit more about the conflict. He lives in Israel, but also talks about Jewish identity more broadly and really emphasizes the indigenous aspect of Jewish identity and taking pride in the indigenous aspect of Jewish identity. And I think that is absolutely fantastic. And the third activist that I think is amazing for these sound bites is an account called Roots Metals. And she is just an incredibly intelligent person who will come up with these sort of like 5 to 10 slide little infographics about different aspects of anti-Semitism and Jewish identity. And I think something that all of this sort of this big push in Jewish activism that has been absolutely fantastic is we've been able to reach these high schoolers, middle schoolers, that kind of stuff really well. So I think, yeah, I can put it in the chat here.
Thank you.
Yeah,
that would be helpful. Or just email it to me and I'll include it with
perfect. Yeah. I'll do
the recording.
Awesome.
Another suggestion comes as to activism is from Scott, and he says high school students should apply to the American Jewish Committee's Leaders for Tomorrow program, which I do not know about, but
yes, that is an absolutely fantastic program. Absolutely, everybody should be applying to that program.
Okay, and Stephen says, do you have any courses at UMass Amherst on settler colonialism, which teach a non-historic narrative of the history of Israel?
So thank God there are no active courses that I've seen that teach this narrative. There used to be a professor he was the one that set up all of these BDS events, and he would make it extra credit on his exams to be like, what is Israel? And it's like settler colonialism or not settler colonialism, and then it's like extra credit for saying settler colonialism. And like a lot of really problematic stuff like that. Since then, I haven't seen too much. But I also haven't taken any of the like politics of the Middle East courses because I'm genuinely a little afraid. Yeah.
Okay. Somebody wants you to spell out roots metals.
Yes. Okay. So I'll put them in
Put it in the
but
chat.
also
Okay.
ROOTSMETALS. Like
Okay.
just
MET. Yeah. Okay. And Michael asks, what have various Jewish organizations done to help Jewish students on campus, and what more can they do to be helpful? You know, outside large organizations.
Sorry, wait, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. What have various Jewish organizations done to help Jewish students on campus, and what more can they do to be helpful?
Yeah, so I think I've actually received an incredible amount of support from different Jewish organizations. For example, ICC, Israel on Campus Coalition, has been hugely helpful in helping us deal with sort of the politics of student government. Stand With Us, I interned with them. They have really, really good slideshows and little, stuff, for example, about like, the difference between legitimate criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism. So I think that from a materials perspective and all of those kind of things, these Jewish organizations have been incredibly helpful. I think the next step that we need is also to continue to educate Jews and non-Jews about specifically Jewish identity. And I really think something that hasn't been hugely emphasized, because it's also just, a relatively new concept, is this idea of Purim versus Hanukkah anti-Semitism and the type of anti-Semitism that tries to change Jewish identity in order for acceptance. And I think that's a new program or concept that we can have materials about, that these institutions can provide.
Okay, here's a suggestion from Steve. He says, following up on your response to Jennifer about providing info for high schoolers, we know that training through role playing helps develop skills in combating anti-Semitism and increases confidence. Is there anyone doing this with high schoolers?
Yes. So in our program at IAC, one thing that we do is, I think this is a term actually invented by Stand With Us called ARM, which stands for address, reframe, message. And it's sort of like a little nice tactic for understanding how to have these conversations. And something that we do in these meetings is we practice having different scenarios or different things that you heard and how you would go about responding. But that is absolutely like role playing, and just practicing it out is an amazing way to get ready for those conversations.
Great. And Josie has another suggestion. She said, Stand With Us has a lot of good materials for students to educate about BDS and more on campus and how to speak about Israel. So you said you'd done some work with Stand With Us, yes?
Yes. So I was an intern with Stand With Us this past semester. Their materials are amazing. It's been so helpful for us just to have these things on hand that we can bring to our campuses.
Okay, and Debbie wants to know, any additional thoughts on how to deal with groups like If Not Now, who actively recruit young people to be anti-Israel and say they are combating anti-Semitism?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is first of all, trying our best to find ways, and how this would practically happen, I genuinely don't know, but I think something for us to think about is reaching out to Jews that are disconnected from the Jewish community, or don't have the ability to grow up in the Jewish community for whatever reason, finding ways to reach out to them, because they grow up with a non-Jewish understanding of anti-Semitism, and then when they're told that you're combating anti-Semitism, then they actively get to be a part of that. And I think just the more education that we can do on Jewish identity specifically, the less that these groups will be able to hijack all of these other, or get into all of these younger kids' minds and be able to, enforce these ideas.
Well, thank you, Noam, for a wonderful, one more message, but thank you for such a wonderful evening, for opening our eyes and educating us about the realities that are going on campus. Scott, also another comment, many of the Jews who are anti-Zionist should be told that they are speaking from a tremendous position of privilege. American Jews may not feel the need for the safety net that is Israel. Tell the Jews of France and Yemen and Ethiopia that there's no need for Israel. This is also why the idea of a single binational secular state will not work, since an Arab majority would need to shut down Israel, Jewish immigration, in order to maintain their majority. We're really trying, thank you for your comment, but we're really trying not to get into Israeli politics. I think that's a totally another area that we could spend the whole night on. And just another comment, Stephen said he attended an If Not Now training session. All indoctrination, love bombing, offering a new identity as social justice warriors. So, and then finally, we'll go back to Lisa, who we started with. She says, has anyone written a comprehensive book about all of this?
Yes.
It sounds like a doctoral thesis, you know.
So I will highlight a couple of books that I have read that I think are absolutely fantastic. I'll do 3, and then maybe I'll also Terry, give you a list.
Send me more. Yeah.
But I'll do 3. One is How to Fight Anti-Semitism by Barry Weiss. Just an absolutely comprehensive conversation about taking Jewish identity and that being the main way to fight anti-Semitism, but also understanding anti-Semitism both on the right and on the left. The second is Jewish Pride by Ben Freeman, which is about rejecting the shame of anti-Semitism and sort of this idea that if we put our head down and sort of release our Jewish identity, that will be granted safety. And it's about taking active pride in that identity. And the third is a book called Judaism by Daniel Boyarin, which talks about how it basically talks about the evolution of Jewish identity and how it was perpetuated and became just a religion. And it does it through this conversation of the word Judaism. So very interesting book, but I will, get a short list.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Alice and Noam, I'll give you the final last words if you have, if you want to wrap up anything that you haven't had a chance to say yet.
Well, I'd like to say to Noam, I think this is the best program I have seen, not just because I brought you in as a speaker, but truly the best, because we can leave with action items, and you educated us.
Thank you.
So we really want to thank you for doing this.
Thank you. I
Noam,
appreciate it.
your turn now.
Yeah, I guess if just to conclude, I would say, first of all, thank you again all so much for coming.
Thank you.
And I think the biggest takeaway always is to be proud of who we are. This is not the first rise in anti-Semitism that we've seen. It will not be the last. And the way that we've been able to continue on is by continuously taking pride in that identity. And that's not something that's going to change now.
Well, thank you, Noam. We look forward to hearing more from you, maybe on a more positive subject, or more about your experience next year at UMass. So good
Absolutely.
luck. And thank you all for coming. And as I said, everyone will get a recording of tonight's program and whatever Noam sends me. And thank you, Alice, for bringing Noam to our community. Good night. Erev Tov.
Bye, everybody.